one of our Supreme Court justices has retired. Anthony Kennedy. He waffled on us a little bit. So I want to make a point here. I'm going back 200 years, give or take a few, for a little briefing from the men who were there when the first Supreme Court justice was appointed, one John Jay, and the founders and what they said about the Constitution and law. It's worth looking at because we have this idea as time passes, societies change, so you change the laws with it. The writer of the Constitution, the father of the Constitution, James Madison, guys like George Washington and John Adams, they used a term, they said they understood that God's laws are immutable. They are coeval, not evil, E-V-I-L, C-O-E-V-A-L, coeval. They're contemporary. What God said thousands of years ago remain extant. They stay there. No matter the ebb and flow of the human race, till God comes back out of the sky, Jesus comes back. So watch. Now, this is John Adams, second president of these United States. Our Constitution, once he read it, he said, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. You have to have, according to John Adams, 200 years ago, you have to have a moral, religious, upright, virtuous people, or the Constitution does not do well. When you put men in place of Supreme Court justices who retire, you put another one in there. You're running the danger of putting someone in there who will make decisions superseding what God said. Law itself comes from God. One lawgiver, one judge, the one that can save and destroy. In other words, what he's saying is the Constitution of the United States came from this. You don't believe it? Here's the father of the Constitution, the one who wrote it. Under the pressure of all these difficulties, Revolutionary War, trying to found a nation, you just think about it. The convention should have found into some deviations from that artificial structure and regular symmetry, which an abstract view of the subject might lead to an ingenious theorist to bestow on a constitution planned in his closet or in his imagination. You know, this thing this Constitution, and by some people's mind, just could have been concocted in my mind back there in the back of the house in the closet. I dreamed it up on my own, going to govern a nation. The real wonder is that so many difficulties should have been surmounted, and surmounted with a unanimity almost as unprecedented as it must have been unexpected. He said, this is quite the document. He's fixing to tell you the writer of the Constitution, where it came from, the source of it. He said, a lot of people think maybe I got back there in my closet and dreamed this up, or somebody, just off the top of his head. So let me just write down a few things to govern a nation. And as it turned out, the greatest nation on earth. It is impossible for the man of pious reflection not to perceive in it, the Constitution, a finger of that almighty hand which has been so frequently and signally extended to our relief in the critical stages of the revolution. What the father of your Constitution and mine is saying is the source of the Constitution came from the Word of God. The finger of that almighty hand. He's the reason you're fixing to have the greatest nation on earth. Alexander Hamilton, he said, we have what we call the law of nature, which being coeval with mankind, contemporary at any time, and dictated by God himself, is, of course, superior in obligation to any other. Therefore, it is binding over all the globe, God's moral law. In all countries, moral law. The Chinese, the Russians, it's all written on all of them's hearts. All men, worldwide, according to Alexander Hamilton. And at all times, no human laws, the ones men dream up, are of any validity if they're contrary to God's moral law. And with them, the laws of God, moral law, it'll be coexistent. It'll stay there from now on. Being founded by infinite wisdom, coming from God, and goodness on essential right, which never varies, it can require God's laws, moral law, no amendment or alteration. Do not mess with what God said. That's why you sign your name in the Bible. Said, I'll go with what God said. Oh, by the way, another thing John Jay said, real Christians will abstain from violating the rights of others. You have a right to go in and have a meal in a restaurant, but what do we do these days? We roll up in there and get to cursing them. They got their children there, and they run them out of the restaurant. Christian people would never do that, ever. You say, where's that coming from? It's coming from the ones who do not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God. You don't retain the knowledge of God, there goes your moral law. There goes your standard of conduct. There goes your civility. Civility means politeness. You see how it works? From the Supreme Court to people on the street, to the news media, to the college professors, you say they're butchering natural law written on their heart. And countries all around us have gone down that road, and now we're on that path. Half the country running around lawless. Everyone who sins breaks the law. In fact, sin is lawlessness. Therefore, when one Supreme Court justice retires, you better put one back in his shoes, whatever he did. It's hard for men to be just and dispense justice because we're all lawbreakers, even the ones who dispense the law, the Supreme Court. But above them, and there's a vast difference, I've said to you before, between the Supreme Court, sinful men trying their best to dispense law, moral law, natural law from God. They struggle with it because they're sinful. So your best shot is to say, make sure when you replace a Supreme Court justice, make sure that dude is godly, has a firmness in his mind and awareness of God. He has not forgotten to keep the knowledge of God, because he himself, a Supreme Court justice, is going to answer to the Supreme Being, who's the one lawgiver and judge who can both save, and that includes the Supreme Court justices. He can save them or he can destroy them. Better make sure you're in tune with what the writer of this book said. Inside the pages of this book is moral, natural law. It is from God, along with all of our rights. Don't forget that. Just a few words down here under the big oak trees on the riverbank. Put that in your pipe and smoke it.